Afternoon, and thank you all for joining. I'm Olney. I'm the host of KCRW's To the Point, and I am the moderator, as just described, for today's conversation. This is a community conference call hosted by the United Way of Greater LA and its Everyone In campaign. That's focused on building political and public will to end homelessness by creating more supportive and affordable housing across LA County. There's a lot of frustration about homelessness. It continues to flare up across LA, so the campaign is using the month of November to highlight why they believe that housing first is the only proven strategy that can permanently end homelessness. Today's call is designed to explore the many facets of this housing first policy. Our goal is for the conversation to flow like a panel discussion. That's pretty difficult on Zoom, but we're going to do the best that we possibly can in order to bring it off. We've received a lot of questions in advance of today's call, so we're going to try to answer those during the conversation and at the end as well. If you're watching on Zoom, you can ask questions. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box there. And we'll try to answer those questions either in real time or later on social media. Now, there are four parts to today's conversation. The first part is this. We'll hear from people on the front lines working to provide housing to folks in need, and we'll get an update on Proposition HHH. That's the billion-dollar initiative to create more housing in the city of LA. Second, we'll look at housing innovations that are focused on increasing the speed of construction and reducing the cost of supportive and affordable housing. Third, we'll hear what housing advocates are prioritizing for the new year. And finally, we'll hear what you can do to support these efforts. For each group of panelists, I'll start with a question and then we will move on to a group discussion. So let's get underway. This month marks the 4th anniversary of the voters passing Proposition HHH, that's in the city of Los Angeles. It raised more than $1 billion to create supportive and affordable housing. Joining us today for an update on the progress and the impact of Prop HHH are Channa Grace, President and CEO of Women Organizing Resources, Knowledge and Services, that's also known as WORKS, Selena Alvarez, the Executive Director of Housing Works, and Ann Sewell, General Manager of Housing and Community Investment with the city of Los Angeles. So Ann, let's start with you. 4 years ago, the voters in the city approved up to $1.2 billion in bonds for the creation of supportive and affordable housing. Can you give us a quick update on what's happening with all that money?
Yes, definitely. And thank you and good morning. Thank you, Warren. Good morning, everybody. So we have currently about 7,900 HHH units in the pipeline and another 2,041 regular non-HHH city supported supportive housing units. You probably, only a few of us ever remember in the flurry of marketing that originally HHH was designed to help the city jump from 300 to 1,000 units of supportive housing a year. So over 10 years to do 7,000 more units than we were doing with the resources that we had in 2015. So we are there. We have now, we have that many units and more in the pipeline, and we will meet our goals. We will have everything built and done at least a year ahead of schedule. So as United Way likes to put on the side of buses, in 3 years, we will have done more than we've done in the past 30 in terms of supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. So that's exciting. Although we do, but I also like to, it's not the side of bus material, but we're all really smart people and we're good at basic math, and we never thought that we were going to end homelessness for 30,000 people in the city or 50,000 people countywide at the time that we started this with 10,000 units. We knew that it was always a down payment in the beginning of proving that it could be done, that homes end homelessness, and that we could move people into these units.
So Chana Grace, your organization has received some of that money to create more housing. What have you done with it? Chana, are you with us? We don't seem to be hearing from Chana, so perhaps then I should
Can
move
you
on.
hear me?
Oops, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you are. That's all right. You've gotten some
Okay.
of that money. What have you done with it?
So we built a development called 88th in Vermont. It runs from 2 blocks from Vermont over to Menlo. And it is 2 buildings, 21 units for youth and the balance for residential units. We have affordable PSH units, 27 studio, 1-bedroom units for homeless and chronically homeless individuals with FSP, rental subsidies, 19 2- and 3-bedroom units for homeless families, 14 1-, 2-, and 3-bedroom units for low-income individuals and families at 40% of AMI, which is about 45,000 for a family of 4. So we feel very pleased. In addition, we also received, I think it was from the CAO's office, money to develop the 9,500 square foot community and service center, which is down below on Vermont. And then we have a very small, but it is their commercial space. It hasn't been decided exactly what that's going to be, but it's right there on Vermont. And hopefully it too will be a hub for folks. Do you want to know about how much we spent? If you do, we spent all in about 34 million and came in a little over $500,000 a unit.
Okay, let me turn rather to Selena Alvarez. What role is Housing Works playing in these HHH buildings? And what are you and your organization seeing so far?
Hi, Warren. Thank you. So currently Housing Works is the lead on-site service provider for 6 developments, of which one of those developments is an HHH property. That's the 88th in Vermont site that Chana just spoke about. We do have 2 more properties in the pipeline this year and into the new year, which will bring our total number of sites that we serve on site to 8. 88th in Vermont is the first HHH development that we assisted with Lisa in late 2019. Our role at Housing Works is to partner with like-minded developers, those who are looking to create housing for people coming off the streets and who are interested in also ensuring that the communities themselves can benefit from such an effort. We offer supportive services, which means that we foster stability and a sense of belonging. We work with tenants, not for them. We actively promote positive norms. We create linkages to resources while also advocating on behalf of participants to ensure their needs are met. Another part of what we do on site is we provide enriched services. So we have an enriched service coordinator who is a person with lived experience, who has also a background of living on the streets and being homeless for many years. And that person's job is basically to create opportunities to help folks learn the life skills that maybe they don't come into the building with. I'm proud that one of the things we're going to be offering at 88th in Vermont, that it's already a project underway. We got a grant from the LA City Arts folks, and we have another participant who's an artist in our scattered site properties, and he's going to be teaching paper mache classes. It's going to happen virtually, but nonetheless, he's going to be facilitating some art classes, and these are going to be not only available to the tenants of 88th in Vermont, but we're really going to do outreach within the local community, because for us, it's really about just serving the people that live there and making sure that the community also in which these developments are being built also feel part of.
Well, that leads very smoothly into a question that I want to ask all of you. Housing first, as it's commonly known, is the idea that permanent housing is the critical first ingredient, the first step in ending homelessness. It does not mean housing only. So what do you say to people who are frustrated with homelessness and who doubt the concept of housing first? And let's go in reverse order on this. So Selena, we'll start with you first.
Sure. I'll just tell a little story because I think that this is one of the best ways to conceptualize it. So there was a study done in the 60s in a Pennsylvania town called Roseto, an Italian-American community where extended families often lived together under one roof. The researchers were interested in Roseto because the heart disease rates were much lower than in the surrounding towns. They looked at smoking, exercise, diet, but found no obvious reason for the reduced rates. Then in the 70s, Roseto residents started moving into single family homes and young people left town for college in the big city. Slowly, the social fabric began to unravel and heart disease rates in Roseto rose to match the national average. It was not good habits and diet that had been protecting people's hearts for all those decades. It was connection. So I would say to people that, housing is only the first step. Housing first is an opportunity to engage individuals and create relationships that are meaningful and purposeful so that we can move people from less destructive behaviors to more constructive and productive behaviors.
So Jana Grace, some thoughts from you. Well, what can you add as to this question as to whether or not we should stick with the housing first strategy?
Well, I think one of the things that has really touched my heart is when we opened another development called Teague Terrace. And that was our first, I think, real foray into more multifamily than young people. And one of the things that was it touched my heart so is because there was a gentleman there and he told me how happy he was that he could die in his bed. And part of what Housing Works did for us in that population, which were all formerly unhoused persons and persons with developmental disabilities. And the fact that had been built in the bricks and mortar was community. And community building is really, really important. And that's why I think our partnership with Housing Works is so important to the entire community, not just those who live within the housing, but those in the vicinity around the housing. So I can't overstate how important services right there where people are who've come from the streets, regardless of how they referred or how they got there, and having people of lived experience working with them so that their quality of life can shift.
And Sewell, back to you. Same question.
Thank you. So I think Housing First is really important to truly ending homelessness. I mean, when you are in a shelter or a safe parking lot or safe landing RV lot, you still are homeless and waiting for that permanent home. But you are definitely not experiencing street homelessness in the same way. And I think what we keep forgetting, it's not either or, it's both and. We need to build permanent supportive housing. We need more and more and more of it. We already have a deficit of housing across California, and we have a deficit of housing for people who need additional support to be successfully housed. That does not mean that we shouldn't do something about the right now and the frustration of people who can't, most of my neighbors, I live in the city of LA, most of my neighbors voted for HHH. And yet every single day they are like, what's going on here? There are still homeless people in the Wells Fargo parking lot up at the end of the street. How come this isn't working? And what they mean is, I really am committed to ending homelessness and I don't see that it's getting better. And so we need to have a short-term solution and really the patience, as one of my friends said, there is no silver bullet, there is only silver buckshot. And we need to do all of it.
Yes.
Well, final question, open question for all of you, anybody who wants to pitch in. We all know that even if we build all of these houses, there's not going to be enough, or all these housing units, I should say, it's not going to be enough. The problem is just infinitely bigger than that. So what should we focus on next as a city and county in order to try to deal with this. Who wants to be first?
I'll
That's
go.
always a dangerous question to ask me. Ryan, do you want to go, Selena? So what we should do next, we should do more
Yes.
building of permanent supportive housing. We should get really, sort of maybe update our understanding of the needs of people who are experiencing homelessness on the street and see whether we need to do more facilities that have more supports, like adult residential facilities for the elderly. And we need to do more for the right now and more for the permanent housing.
I was going to say exactly, or not exactly, but close to what Ann said. And also, so many people who have been on the streets have mental health challenges. And we really need to begin to understand, I think, and prepare people for being housed. Because there is so, I don't think unless you've been out there to see actually people waiting for housing or just living on the streets, what that's like for them. And empathy is good, but it's not enough. And I think we need our city, our society has a lot of mental health challenges right now, and probably will for a while. And we need, I don't want to say army, but we need a whole bunch of folks who will dedicate themselves to working with the people that are unhoused for whatever the reason they are unhoused.
Well, we need to move on. If you have anything to add, please do it quickly.
I just say, in addition to everything Chana and Ann said, we need to also think about the systemic racism factors and how these systems perpetuate trauma and oppressive tactics that are continuing to marginalize and disenfranchise people.
Okay, well, thank you all. That has been terrific. And we've gotten a really good idea of what's going on the front line. So we know now 7,000 units of supportable and affordable housing are under construction. But the costs are higher and the development times are longer than anybody wanted to see. So the next segment is going to explore what efforts are underway to reduce the costs and increase the speed of development. And here to share their perspectives are Vanessa Luna, who is Associate Director of Multifamily Housing with Brilliant Corners, Andy Israel, who's the founder and CEO of RXLA, and Greg Comenar, who is a partner at Daylight Community Development. And Vanessa, I want to begin with you. Do you have an example that you can share of something that Brilliant Corners is doing to either reduce housing costs or increase development speed, or even both?
Yeah, and I'm happy to share it. At Brilliant Corners, for our HHH Innovation Challenge Award, we chose to focus on a model that's not new, but that we think has a lot of promise, and that is taking non-residential buildings and turning them into housing, so adaptive reuse. And this could be a public storage building, it could be a medical or business office suite, it could be a building like our current site in Wilmington, which is a one-story empty grocery store. And so I think this has a lot of potential in terms of reducing both construction cost as well as time, because obviously starting with an existing building, we have material to work with, we may be doing less foundation work, and in doing less work, we're cutting down direct cost as well as duration of construction. And so it can go faster. In Los Angeles in particular, we have a large stock of existing buildings. So we think that's also potential. And particularly with the pandemic, we're seeing that more businesses have been forced to go remote, and that I think businesses are realizing that they may be able to reduce their physical space when the pandemic is at an end. And so even though we may, hopefully soon in the future, we're able to return to a more normal environment, but we think that there may be an influx of properties on the market that we can get at better pricing as businesses begin to transition out of more physical space and allow their workers to continue remotely, at least maybe part-time. And so we think that could be a great opportunity.
So Andy, tell us about your development model.
Yeah, so we are a newer affordable housing development company, also working to build permanent supportive housing. We are piloting a new financing model that does not utilize the conventional range of public financing programs. So we are trying to use no government money to actually develop our buildings. And our goal is to create with the same end goal, create the same kind of high quality units that all of our colleagues on this call develop, but we're getting there by raising private equity from individuals and companies and others who are not typically part of this ecosystem. So we're bringing in new capital to achieve these same goals. And without using the public funding sources, we are actually able to work around some of the unintended barriers that do come with public programs, which we'll talk more about, but particularly speed and cost.
Okay, so Greg, we're talking about reducing costs on the one hand, increasing the speed of development on the other.
Great, thanks, Warren. And to follow in Andy's footsteps, we founded Daylight Community Development 3 years ago to sort of increase the pace and scale of building supportive housing in Los Angeles. What we've really focused on over the last couple of years is creating a sort of flexible modular development model. So currently we have 5 projects in the city of Los Angeles, 4 of which are utilizing modular construction. We're using the same modular manufacturer, the same engineering team, the same construction team to kind of create a rinse and repeat model. And then on the financing side, it's not as 100% privately financed as Andy's, but we are utilizing just one source, just HHH, and then flexible vouchers from the county. So having fewer sources allows us to move faster and be able to sort of increase reduce that time on the pre-development side. And then we're building it a 12-month construction timeline because we can do off-site work simultaneously with site work. And it's been able to reduce cost and time.
So here's a question for all 3 of you. If you had a magic wand, this is the one, the kind of question that you can go on forever about if you want to, but if you had a magic wand and you could do one thing at either the local or state level, just one thing to either reduce the cost or increase the development speed, what would it be? And Andy Israel, let me start with you on that one.
Yeah, so I think that my one thing I would want to do with my wand would be to help find a way to adjust the prevailing wage system. So prevailing wage rates are when we use state funds or when we utilize local funds that come from the state or federal, we end up being those funds come tied to prevailing wages, which means that when we're using funds to build buildings, we are required to pay construction workers on site at certain levels. And while that makes sense and is meant to be fair, what happens is that unintentionally, those prevailing wage rates are so high that it makes it so incredibly expensive to build. And so part of my model, one of the reasons why I wanted to pilot using no public money was to avoid the prevailing wage rates. And as a result, I'm able to build units at less than half the cost of what some of my colleagues using the traditional sources are doing. And so, you know, like I said, I'm not anti-prevailing wage, but I would want to use the wand to find some way to be able to have that type of system exist, that type of regulated system exist, but to make it a little bit less of a cost hindrance.
So Greg, good commenter, you got the wand, wave it.
This is a dangerous question, but I will caveat by saying that increasing the number of permanent supportive housing units by development and affordable housing development is critically important on the development side. But I think, generally, holistically, we need to be thinking bigger with more flexible programs that the city and the county can offer. Things like more targeted acquisitions. So, we are buying hotels with Project Room Key, but expanding that, being able to buy particular assets that come online. Think about a naturally occurring family affordable building that's a cornerstone of a neighborhood. Rather than turning that and sort of having a potential risk of losing that property in that sort of cornerstone building, the city being able to buy that, maybe transferring it over to a nonprofit, but having more flexibility. The city's doing a lot in terms of land transfer. So using city-owned sites in order to develop affordable housing. But in general, I really think we need to be thinking more, not just about building, but buying. It doesn't need to be publicly owned over the long run. We could have a nonprofit run, publicly financed acquisition fund to buy units and preserve affordable housing. And just thinking about it more broadly, obviously this comes with huge funding requirements, and we'd have to sort of really dig in on how to pay for it. But we need to broaden the way that we preserve affordable housing over the long run.
So Vanessa Luna, the wand is being passed to you.
Excellent. I'm going to focus on local approvals. And this would be approvals for projects, the entitlements that we need. So not building permits, but entitlements. And I think the state has been fortunate in Los Angeles in particular lately in terms of the number and type of laws and legislation that has been passed to make it easier to build supportive housing and affordable housing. But I don't think we've gone quite far enough. In Los Angeles, in our Wilmington site, for example, we're using a supportive housing ordinance to help build what we need to do on the site. But it still takes time because there's still a process involved, and it's not built into code as a by right, just by right things that you would ask for. And there's things like more units or a taller building that are commonly requested by developers trying to do this type of housing. And if we were to allow that as a by right process, it would really reduce time it takes to get these things done if there's no discretionary approvals. And so I think that's one thing I would really like to look at is building that in, and also increasing the minimum qualifying requirements for those incentives. Because to take transit-oriented communities as an example, this ordinance, I was really excited when it passed in Los Angeles, incentivizes housing near transit, but it makes it more competitive on the market for properties. So as a developer trying to do 100% supportive housing or affordable housing, I'm competing with private for-profit developers who are going to do the minimum required percentage of units. And it makes it just more competitive. So I think when we're doing these things, we really need to think about that and the other unintended impacts, and build something in to really incentivize people to do higher percentages of affordable and supportive housing and make it easier.
Okay, you're all pretty good with those wands. If only the magic would occur. I do have a final question for you all, and that has to do with the federal government. The general consensus is that Joe Biden will be inaugurated on the 20th of January. Most people think that in any case. How could the federal government change the equation for us here in Los Angeles, both in terms of reducing costs or increasing development speed? And let me go first to Greg Kamenar on that one.
Sure. Thanks, Warren. So this is a very nerdy, esoteric one, but stick with me. The 4% tax credit is coupled with tax-exempt bonds. So you have basically interest-free construction loans that incentivize lenders to lend on affordable housing projects. The federal government has a cap statewide on the amount of tax-exempt debt that they can issue each year. But right now, rates are so low that incentive is not all that helpful, and rates are low enough that we still have lenders looking to do affordable housing. In my opinion, you could reduce that cap and sort of unleash the 4% tax credit. There's been a lot of talk that both 9% and 4% are getting competitive, but it's because of this bond cap. So, Mr. Biden, please do me a favor and sort of drop that cap. And at the end of the day, it's not a tax increase, it's tax expenditure. So it's hopefully something that could get done and definitely increase the amount of resources available for affordable development.
We don't know for sure that the president-elect is watching or listening right now, but hopefully
Let's hope so.
Might be, or at least the word will get to him one way or another. Andy, your turn.
Yeah, so the federal government's two most impactful and widespread programs in this space are tax credits and Section 8 or vouchers for operating subsidies. And I'll let Greg and Vanessa cover the tax credit financing issues. And I just wanted to talk quickly about vouchers and expanding the voucher program. I think that maintaining it and enlarging it and expanding it is really critical. And while it doesn't specifically speak to speed and cost per se, we need these vouchers because we can't develop affordable housing and operate affordable housing without them. I talked about how my model doesn't use public funds to build. I've been able to go out and find capital to build buildings that is not from the government, but in order to operate my building and really provide housing and services for the lowest income, extremely low income, and people experiencing chronically homeless, in order to house those populations, I can't do that without voucher support. So vouchers, vouchers, vouchers. We can't do this without them. And, you know, vouchers do in some cases trigger prevailing wage. So to the extent that the federal government can responsibly and thoughtfully build more flexibility into the voucher program, that would be a change that I think, those are changes I think that would be really impactful.
Vanessa?
Sure. I'm glad Greg already mentioned the topic, the nerdy topic of the 4% tax credits. I think another area that we could focus in on there is fixing that credit rate. So currently the rate is allowed to fluctuate. Several years ago, Congress actually fixed the 9% rate. So on the 9% side for that program, they fixed it, and it meant that it doesn't fluctuate anymore. So it never goes up, but it also never decreases. And the decreases we don't want because they result in less private equity from the investors that are investing into the tax credit project. So the 4% credit rate has never been fixed, and we're at a quite low right now with the market. It began plummeting last year at some point, and it has stayed very low. And it's resulted in a lot of gaps and difficulties from developers who are trying to fill those gaps. They were counting on more equity, and then where do they turn? So it's often public subsidy, maybe more increased private debt, but it makes it very difficult and challenging. And so that's a somewhat easy thing that has been on the table a number of times at the federal level, considered, and has not gotten passed yet. It's actually been included in some legislation, the Emergency Affordable Housing Act of 2020. So I'm really hoping it's on the table again, hoping that that's something that will actually happen and we won't need a magic wand for.
Well, thank you all very much, all of you, for that. You know, a couple of you have used the word nerdy and rather apologized for it. I don't think you should do that. I think that getting nerdy is absolutely essential in all of this, and it's important for the rest of us to know what you find when you get nerdy. So thank you very much.
I didn't apologize for it.
Revealing that. Good. I'm glad you didn't. And I'm glad to hear that. So we've talked a lot about the efforts that are already underway, and we focused on housing development primarily. We know these are not the only variables. Housing policy and the rules of the game are just as important as the sticks and the bricks. So here to talk about efforts to increase funding and knock out obstacles to development and help people keep the homes that they already have are Jesse Solansky, President and CEO of West Hollywood Community Housing Corporation, and the Policy Committee Chair with the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. Sasha Herndon, who's public policy advocate with the Intercity Law Center, and Lisa Hershey, Executive Director of Housing California, headquartered in Sacramento. Welcome to all of you. And Lisa, I want to start with you as you look ahead to 2021. Where is Sacramento headed on housing policy, and how are you trying to shape that direction?
Well, thank you so much, Warren, for the question, for Tommy and everyone for having me here today to join this rich conversation with a lot of my LA colleagues. As hopefully you know, housing policy is still a hot topic for the state legislature. This year, 2020, Governor Newsom came out with a strong budget in January, talking about housing and homelessness as the state of the state in February, and then COVID hit and the whole world changed. So in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and all the associated impacts, most of our housing and homelessness bills failed this year. They didn't move forward or didn't get signed. So we really see the moment as now to advance our housing justice movement and to reach for our North Star of creating homes, health, and prosperity for all. Truly, we believe the stars are aligning, from the Biden and Harris winning ticket to the recent state auditor's report on affordable housing, noting efforts are currently not strong enough and are misaligned and inconsistent. In other words, we need a long-term strategic vision and a blueprint of coordinated affordable housing plans to create our Californians with home for all. So fortunately, we've been in Sacramento and across the state with many of you, been working with our partnership, the California Housing Partners, and everyone in LA to create a California Roadmap Home 2030 with this long-term strategic vision, a transformational values-based equity-centered framework, and a comprehensive set of bold evidence-based solutions designed to create the true housing policy, structural reforms, and system change we need. Along with building this long-term roadmap with a long-term vision, we also recognize the need to shape policy in Sacramento right now. And so we've been thinking about and working with the administration and the legislature on what we need to do within this next year, the 2021-22 legislative cycle. What we know looking into 2021, and the policy session actually starts in December, so in less than a week or about a week, is that they're going to protect people now. The governor and the legislature are focused on the pandemic, the impacts it's having on our folks, people living on the streets, already experiencing housing instability and potential homelessness. We know that the administration signed AB 3088 in this past session to be kind of a stopgap, to prevent evictions, to protect people, but it's not far enough. They know it, they recognized it, they owned it, and so they're focusing in and are going to pick up conversations and continue conversations to protect people where they are. And Sasha may be talking more about that in a moment. We also know that the administration continues to look to federal policy to see what resources we're going to get from federal government to really stopgap leverage the deficits that we're experiencing in California. We went from a $12 billion surplus and reserves to a $54 billion deficit in our budget this year. And so really leaning into our federal partners to invest in California. And at Housing California, we're focused in at a couple of priorities that continue the momentum that are shaped within the context of the Roadmap Home. And I'll share 3 of those with you now. The first one is during the last session, the Senate, with led leadership by the Pro Tem Atkins, we're trying to advance affordable housing production package. So that affordable housing production package got stopped. It didn't make it. It will come up again. We do believe the Senate will continue this package forward, and we really very much need an affordable housing production package that looks at land use reforms, that looks at zoning, and that considers more resources. But we also know that that package didn't go far enough to really protect the people we care about. People at 50% area median income below, people that are already experiencing the housing instability, housing poverty, or living in homelessness, unhoused. And so we will lean in very heavily to make sure that this people-centered race forward perspective informs and advances policy moving forward. Secondly, Housing California has been with LA actually deeply in partnership with many of you, been advancing a permanent source for homelessness for the last couple of years. The Big 13 mayors are on board with Mayor Garcetti playing a key part. Everyone in is part of this, and lots of you that are on the call have been involved in some way. And the intention is to really build a broad coalition, diverse multi-sector coalition, to advance a permanent source for homelessness in the long game. This campaign just kicked off on November 9th, and it's called Bring California Home, and you can check it out if you're interested. Would love to have everyone join us there. And then finally, and actually Greg mentioned this a little bit earlier, he was talking about acquisition rehab and really repurposing the land that's available in a different way. And we also see this as the ability to address the racial wealth gap, prevent speculation on the market, and preserve housing for people struggling the most, building off of what we already have in community. This past year, we advanced a bill called Assembly Bill 1703, and it has a campaign going along with it, Stable Homes California, and it's really designed to preserve the NOAAs, the naturally occurring affordable housing that is unsubsidized currently, giving communities the right of first refusal, nonprofits and tenants, so that we can really shift that power paradigm and preserve homes that we need so dramatically.
So Sasha Herndon, a mixed bag for tenant protection this year in Sacramento and elsewhere. Rent control failed on the statewide ballot yet again. What should the focus be on tenant protections?
So thank you. I would start by saying that every year is a mixed bag, and that if we gave up, we wouldn't have housing advocates when we didn't win everything. You know, in terms of Proposition 21, I wouldn't read sort of overly into those results as a lack of support for tenants in California. That is a pretty technical measure with a lot of money spent to defeat it. But if we look at the legislative session this year, 2019 and 2020 together, I think we've actually seen enormous progress on tenants' rights. We've managed to pass a statewide measure to limit rent gouging and put a ceiling on rent increases, require just cause for eviction for millions of tenants, meaning that landlords actually have to state their motivation. And we banned discrimination against recipients of housing assistance so that, you know, we put people on equal footing, whether they are trying to use a voucher or trying to use cash to rent their housing. All of these things represent really powerful victories and really decades of advocacy from tenants and from tenant advocates across the state. So I think that, you know, pre-COVID, we saw a lot of really major victories that I think we were hoping to sort of implement and build on. Obviously, the pandemic has thrown things a little off course. So I think, you know, as we look at this coming year, I think we need to focus on housing as the single best protection against COVID. We need to extend the emergency eviction protections in the strongest form we can in the stopgap measure that Lisa mentioned, AB 3088, which was passed on the last day of the legislative session. That should be the first day of the legislative session this year. That's what we need to start looking at so that we can really buy ourselves time and, you know, put in place robust permanent eviction protections. And that includes, you know, I think we need to do that from a health protection lens, really recognizing that evictions expose people to this virus. And that includes addressing outstanding rent for so many tenants that we cannot realistically expect people to just pay back magically when we're keeping them from getting back to work. It includes creating solutions in the foreclosure space for struggling landlords who are at immediate risk of losing properties, with specific measures, I think, for affordable housing providers who operate on smaller margins, are not sort of, you know, operating from a profit motive. And then we need to address the long-term credit issues that are going to come up for all of these stakeholders that really, I think, threaten our recovery and could slow us down in sort of hopefully getting back to at least a more normal place. Lastly, I would say we can't forget about supply. There's a misconception that tenant advocates sort of don't play in the supply space. I think that's not true, and we need to, you know, protect the housing that people have while we target resources and interventions to creating the units that are most desperately needed for vulnerable residents.
Jesse Slansky, from a local standpoint, what key advocacy goals do you think we should be thinking about for the next 12 to 24 months?
Thanks, Warren. So my role here today is representing SCALE, which is a membership organization representing nonprofit affordable housing developers in the five county Southern California region. Last Friday, we convened a legislative visioning session of our members to identify our priorities for 2021. So your question is very timely. Our legislative visioning session conclusions are still in flux, and there were definitely some statewide priorities that have been identified, such as appealing Article 34, increasing by right opportunities for affordable housing development, expanding CEQA exemptions, streamlining our funding programs and regulations, but then also funding. So that leads me really into the answer to your question here. The federal government had a program called the HOME program, and that was basically defunded last year, the year before. Statewide, the Community Redevelopment Act was dissolved. years ago. So that really cut some of our major sources of affordable housing funding and have put the pressure on the local jurisdictions to make up the gap. As everyone's familiar with, we have the Triple H program, but that was a one-time source and at this point has been fully exhausted. So I think one of our key local priorities is establishing some kind of funding source, some kind of permanent funding source that includes capital for building buildings, rental subsidy to support ongoing operations, and then also critically the services that are so desperately needed to keep people housed. So this is a holistic approach that covers again, capital, operations, and services. We'd also like to make sure that the funding targets not just permanent supportive housing, but also non-special needs affordable housing, which would be housing for people between 30 and 80% of the area median income. The United Way says homes solve homelessness. We certainly agree, but in Ann Sewell's yes and approach, we also like to say homes prevent homelessness. So for people having a safe place to live, it helps prevent people. If it's safe and affordable, if they're not at risk of displacement, it will help prevent people from falling into homelessness. And that's a critical piece of the puzzle that we hope is not overlooked. So those are our legislative priorities.
Let me ask you all, changing policy either locally or at the state is just an enormously difficult task, even as the affordability issue gets worse and worse. And why is there such a barrier to making any change? And Lisa, let me go back to you with that.
Lisa, you're muted.
Lisa, you might be muted. I was gonna.
I just wanted to create the opportunity. There you go. I went first, so you're welcome. Thank you for the reminder. So we agree that significant challenges exist to advancing housing policy locally and statewide. As you know from your deep long-term work and polling in Los Angeles, we need a clear strategic vision and 3 things to create the conditions to achieve social policy success, like we did in many public health ways, like creating a smoke-free California over the last 3 decades. We've done it for healthcare, we've done it for a variety of different things, but we need 3 conditions. Let's say, for example, that our vision is to create homes, health, and prosperity for all Californians. To get there, we need to do 3 things. We need to set new frames and shape different narratives that win the hearts and minds of our state and local policymakers, which requires that we also shift the mental models of all of our diverse constituencies statewide. Secondly, we need to build and shift power among our multi-sector coalitions and our community organizing networks. And for housing policy, it also means connecting both our affordable housing industry and our social justice allies with people with lived expertise at the center to create a true housing justice movement statewide. And 3, we need to create the structural reforms and systems changes that deconstruct the centuries of discriminatory, harmful policy and practices that one of our speakers spoke to earlier, and reconstruct our values-based, people-centered, equity-forward policies. So here's the bottom line, and my background, some of you know, is public health, and I've been doing that for decades in California. We know that from social science, and what I recently learned from a leading hostage negotiator, the number 1 thing that influences people's decisions, important to remember, and that is the fear of what they're going to lose. So it's important that we remember policymakers are also humans, and they are also impacted by what they're going to lose, their political capital, their constituencies, et cetera. So for example, we had a huge majority in California of folks who voted for the Biden-Harris ticket, thank God. And at the same time, people voted down ballot not to support progressive measures like Proposition 15. So we really need to deconstruct the way people think, because they want to support progressive policies, but they don't want to do things that they perceive hurt them. So in LA, you've already discovered the secret sauce. You passed many important measures, including Measure J, to disinvest to reinvest. Additionally, we've experienced unprecedented successes over the last 4 years in Sacramento. And I'll close with this. It's important to remember, we had unprecedented legislative success in 2017 on homelessness and housing policy. 2018, we won Proposition 1 and Proposition 2, which resulted in $6 billion of affordable housing and homelessness bond. Sasha spoke to the amazing unprecedented tenant protections that we had in 2019, along with incredible budget investments. So we need to keep this mindset, and we need to know that we do have some legislators out there that are willing to do progressive things like AB 3269 that would take us to functional zero on homelessness. And we need to do this all together. We have a lot of room to grow, but you all have set the course for what we need to scale in California.
Well, thank you all very much for being with us for this segment. I think we have run out of time for it, and we need to go to the final segment. And for this part of the day's conversation, I want to welcome, first of all, Mary Bamba. She is a major supporter of the Everyone In campaign. She's been advocating for housing on the West Side. And also with us is Tommy Newman, the Senior Director of Impact Initiatives with the United Way of Greater Los Angeles. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there were questions in advance of the call. So we're going to ask Tommy and Mary to answer some of those and then talk about where the Everyone In campaign is headed in 2021. Tommy, good to you.
Sorry, I know I'm supposed to be quicker with the unmute button. Well, it's great to see all of you. And I really just want to start by appreciating you, Warren, for hosting this call today, and for all the speakers. We love these calls. At one point, I think we were north of 400 people and still holding strong. And so we know that there's a lot of interest, and I appreciate everybody making the time. I actually want to, because we're running a little short on time, punt my question here. And I think we'll go over to Mary. And in the interest of moving it quickly, we'd love, Mary, for you to share a bunch of questions that we received, and the chat has been quite active today, and we'll work to answer those as well. A bunch of questions have been around how you sort of make the leap from identifying this as a problem to becoming an advocate and working on it. And so, not to steal Warren's thunder, but we'd love Mary to hear a little bit about what has brought you as a regular person to this work.
Well, from my own experience, I'd say the first step to becoming an advocate is to get yourself educated. And in my case, I attended a presentation at my church by Everyone In. And what was great about that presentation is that it wasn't just about the problems, but it was about the progress that is already being made and some of the steps that are underway. So at that presentation, we were told about a site owned by the city of Los Angeles that was under consideration for supportive housing. So right after the presentation, I visited the site. I walked around and I saw that it was absolutely perfect for supportive housing. It had a collision center on one side and a nondescript office building on the other. It had an alley behind it, which formed a perfect buffer between it and the nearest residential buildings. So I went home and I got on my computer and I emailed council member Paul Koretz, in whose district the site was, and told him I was fully supportive of it. And I copied the mayor and I copied Sheila Kuhl, our county supervisor. And that's how I got started. So I'd say educate yourself first, and then just start talking to the people closest to you, your friends, your neighbors, your family, and see where those conversations lead you. I had a conversation with a neighbor who surprised me, who said, I feel that the cost of housing is just astronomical. It's not right. So that made me want to educate myself further about housing costs. So.
Tommy?
I love that. Well, thank you, Mary, and we appreciate you being willing to take these risks. We're so proud on the Everyone In campaign to have nearly 3,000 people who have not only signed up for the campaign, but gone through our training work with our organizers across the city and across the county. And so there are a lot more Marys out there helping to support developers, policymakers, and others to do the right thing, to create more supportive and affordable housing in every community across the city and across this county. I would say just a quick teaser, and then I'll throw it back to Warren for our wrap up. In terms of 2021, at least those of us on the Everyone In campaign, but I'm pretty sure everybody on this call, both listening and participating, will be focused on housing affordability, on identifying those new revenue sources, on changing those land use policies, on putting pressure on every level of government to do whatever they can, because I'm not so sure how much longer this window is open for us to do this work. It's hard to keep people's attention. It's hard to maintain momentum in policy change and in advocacy. And so I feel a sense of responsibility, and I know everybody here does as well, to make sure we do everything we can to create the type of city, county, and state that Lisa described, a place where everyone has access to a safe, healthy home in the neighborhood that they choose. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Warren, to wrap it up.
Well, thank you, Tommy. I just have to say, a lot of people say that homelessness is in fact the worst problem that the city and county of Los Angeles have to deal with, and not to mention the whole United States for that matter, the richest country in the history of the world. It's a privilege for me to be able to be part of this and to listen to so many people who are doing so much to try to cope with that issue. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to moderate this. The Everyone In campaign is going to be answering more questions on social media. We hope this has been helpful and informative to everybody in addition to me. If you RSVP'd through the Everyone in LA.org website, they'll be following up with resources via email, and they plan to do another call like this one in the future as well. Until then, I wish you all well. Please not just have a happy Thanksgiving, but be safe as well. And for God's sake, wear the damn mask. Thank you.